Hello everybody, welcome to the latest episode of Games Up podcast. It's episode 70 and I am your host, Cameron McCullough-Keeble. I'm here on my own this week. You might have expected a rundown of this year's biggest games, which is still coming. We're doing it next week, but the reason we decided next week was because one of the biggest games this year is coming out this week, and we haven't had an opportunity to play it yet, but I fully intend to play it this week, so we thought we'd sort of get our hands on that first and then put all our eggs in the right baskets next week when everything is really, really close to release rather than just really close to release. So, with that being said, this week's show is going to be a heavy one because there's a lot of heavy discussions going on in the gaming industry right now. And let's get into, as we do every week, the news. As I said, this week's show is going to be a heavy one, and we need to address one of the heaviest pieces of news in recent years in the gaming industry, so I'm going to go straight into it. David Ballard has come out online and stated that he was sexually harassed while working at Sony-owned studio Naughty Dog. Ballard has not worked at Naughty Dog for around 18 months, but in his time there, he was responsible for environment art for all of the Uncharted games, minus the first one, and The Last of Us. Also, within the last 18 months, it's possible he's done some work on other games as well, maybe stuff we don't know about yet, or stuff that has yet to be released, and thus the credits yet to be released, but we don't know about that, so just to bear in mind. Both he and PlayStation have released statements, and we're going to read them one by one, so Mr. Ballard's and then PlayStation's respectively. And we're going to read them from Eurogamer, where they were both reported. Here's Mr. Ballard's statement. In late 2015, I was sexually harassed at Naughty Dog by a lead. My work environment became extremely toxic afterward. In February 2016, I had a mental breakdown at work, and Sony PlayStation HR became involved. When I told them about the harassment, they ended the call and fired me the next day. They cited the company was moving in a different direction and my job was no longer needed. They tried to silence me by offering $20,000 if I signed a letter agreeing to the termination, as well as to not discuss it with anyone. I declined to sign. I've been unemployed for 17 months since. When interviewers ask why I left Naughty Dog, I say I was burned out by the crunch, ashamed to get to the root of the problem of being sexually harassed. I'm speaking out now because of the strength I've seen in others coming forward about their experiences in the TV film industry. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. I will not let anyone kill my drive or love for the video game industry, my passions or life. And then the statement from Naughty Dog has said, we have recently read on social media that an ex-employee of Naughty Dog, Dave Ballard, claims he was sexually harassed when he worked at Naughty Dog. We've not found any evidence of having received allegations from Mr. Ballard that he was harassed in any way at Naughty Dog or Sony Interactive Entertainment. Harassment and inappropriate conduct have no place at Naughty Dog and Sony Interactive Entertainment. We've taken and always will take reports of sexual harassment and other workplace grievances very seriously. We value every single person who works at Naughty Dog and Sony Interactive Entertainment. It is of the utmost importance to us that we maintain a safe, productive workplace environment that allows us to channel our shared passion for making games. Whatever happens here, us taking sides is far, far beyond the point. This is a situation for someone far smarter and with far more awareness than us to decide upon. However, it must be said that however it goes, it will not be a pleasant outcome. Either one of the industry's most prolific developers will have their reputation tarnished, and if this is true, rightfully so, or a person will be attempting to tarnish a reputation in what is said to be an act of bravery when the situation is truthful. Either way, this is something we don't want to hold an opinion on, and we shouldn't be holding an opinion on, and we hope that whatever truth comes to light is acted on appropriately by either side of this discussion and any kind of justice system that needs to come into place. So now, not to undermine this in any way, but onto some lighter news, the stuff that we can pass opinion on, and that we're much more qualified to talk about. It's that time of the year again when big games are coming out, which means that it's time for the first Broken Street date of the year. If you are in America, certain Target shops are reportedly selling South Park: The Fractured But Whole as of yesterday, at the time of recording, which is Sunday, despite the game's actual release date being Tuesday of this week, i.e. hopefully the day after you hear this podcast or the day after it published. Broken Street dates happen all the time. They are a thing that's happened for a very, very long time in the gaming industry, especially back in the day when games didn't have a universal street date, when they had like one street date that was one day in the UK or another day in America and another day in Japan. This happens a lot, so it's not surprising that it's happened, but it is just a fact that South Park: The Fractured But Whole has been the first victim of Broken Street dates, or the first benefactor of Broken Street dates, however it affects their sales. That is a thing that has happened. Gen 3 is definitely coming to Pokemon Go. Another forced update from Niantic this week brought everything but the moves for the Pocket Monsters, so look forward to some Halloween walkies to catch those new Mons. There's also like a leaked screen of what the game will look like when it's loading that features a bunch of Gen 3 stuff. And there's apparently a new hat that might be Mimikyu, the mimicking Pikachu thing from one of the latest gens. So yeah, Gen 3 definitely seems like it's on the way. Whether it's like a ghostly Halloween version and then all of them later or all of them at once kind of remains to be seen. But something is coming out in the next couple of weeks. So I don't know, upgrade your storage, hoard some coins and enjoy those walks. The team behind the port of PUBG for the Xbox One have said that it is still on track to release this year. It's worth bearing in mind that the game was always stated to enter the platform in early access development, which is basically another way of saying it's a beta on the console. So what this actually means is yet to be seen, because it could enter that console in one of many different forms, and under the term early access development, it would still kind of be what we expected it to launch in. It's just how good the quality of it is when it launches. Nonetheless, hopefully this is an optimistic update, and hopefully we see the game by the end of December this year. On October the 24th, there is going to be some new Hitman content revealed. What will it be? Fuck knows, as all we have right now is a very, very blurry teaser image. There's rumours that the image contains the Ubisoft logo, and looking at it, it does look very much like the Ubisoft logo, but it must be said that this could well be down to just how blurry the image is. Like, it's like deliberately Photoshop blurred. You can't see anything. So whilst it looks like the Ubisoft logo from blurred and afar, it may well not turn out to be the Ubisoft logo when it's de-blurred, I guess. One way or another, this is kind of fascinating for a game that's had such a troubled road to development and such a troubled road to market. We were totally cynical of it when it launched, and it's done really well for itself. So more Hitman content for those who love it is a yay. What kind of shape it will take and what it will look like is a we don't know right now. And finally, this week, which gets us on to our topic of the week, is that PEGI, which is the Pan-European Game Information Board, I think, the Video Game Rating Board, has stated that they cannot define loot boxes as gambling, as this is for a gambling commission to do. So it's time to confront a bit of a recent controversy head-on and ask, are loot boxes gambling? The case for states that loot boxes are sold for real money in most games and purchasable with in-game buyable currency in others. The purpose of a loot box is to hide content behind a game of chance, and thus paying for this game of chance is the equivalent of gambling. You pay for the opportunity to unlock something of value, but this comes with the chance of not receiving anything positive, and thus incentivizing more cost to you, the consumer. In that sense, it is much like the darker side of gambling, as it is a vicious circle of pay, reveal, enjoy or be disappointed, and thus feel the need to pay again. The case against loot boxes as gambling states mainly that you are only receiving in-game items, and thus there is no gambling happening, as you are never going to receive anything with true real-world value. It isn't transferable, and selling it is taking action into your own hands, as for most games, buying or selling accounts is against the terms you sign up with. And thus, all that's really happening is spending money. There's nothing of particular value coming out the other side. Both really interesting cases, and both with a fair amount of precedence behind them. Personally, I'm very conflicted on this. I think loot boxes are a much more preferable system than what's been there in the past. Microtransactions, for example, were a way of definitely piecemealing a game up into purchasable segments. However, with loot boxes, there's a chance that I can get the most out of the content without having to spend another penny. As I've said many times on this show about Overwatch, my time in that game has been absolutely enhanced by loot boxes, and I've paid nothing into it since the game launched. I also think that offsetting the cost of development with the cost of loot boxes is better for games in the long term. It helps to not split the player base and allows major chunks of content to be free at the cost of smaller chunks of content. DLC maps and modes versus skins, for example. I.e., a game like Star Wars Battlefront can hand you DLC maps, DLC modes, new characters, but might ask you to pay for the chance to unlock skins. Now, in my opinion, the game is going to be much more greatly enhanced by the addition of maps, modes, and characters than it is skins, which are usually just cosmetic, But for people who are super into that game, the cosmetic items will make a difference. Battlefront is also a bad example because they kind of sell perks, and from what it seems like from the EA stories this week, they're also selling actual improvements to characters through those loot boxes. But for the most part, loot boxes are used to sell consumables or cosmetic stuff, the kind of stuff that either doesn't last very long and thus is either payable again or doesn't have an indefinite effect on the game and the game's balance, or is just a matter of the looks of the game and doesn't really affect its mechanics. However, I do recognise that loot boxes are hitting the same nerve as gambling. There is a thrill when you get something good and a feeling of meh when you get something bad. And it's undeniable that where gambling exploits its frailest customers with dodgy practices, loot boxes could and probably will do the same. So the question, I think, is more in the ethics of the people in control of the boxes. And unfortunately, the house always wins. So what's the solution? Do we age limit every game with loot boxes? No, I don't think so. I think that will see them die out very quickly, but the need for their cost will always exist, and thus it will simply be replaced with something else, and frankly, probably something a little bit more malicious. Every time that a gaming thing has been either age-gated or outlawed, it's usually been replaced with something a little bit more questionable or a little less transparent in the aim of getting you to spend your money. Do we provide more information on store pages or game boxes? Perhaps, yes. But loads and loads of parents buy their kids COD every year. If they aren't willing to read about the game that literally has the box cover art, how can we be sure that the box info is going to change their minds at all? It is always a good thing to put more information in the hands of consumers, but there are a bunch of consumers who buy on trailers and hype more than information, and loot boxes are probably most likely to affect those people. If we're making a generalization. So more information has to be handled in the right way and has to make sure it targets the right people, and information on game boxes probably isn't going to do that too well. Personally, my solution to this is, and always will be, raise the price of gaming. I'm going to be buying myself South Park: The Fractured But Whole this week, and I cannot wait to sit down for the first time in a little bit of a while and properly get into a good single-player story game, to take a few hours out of a fairly hectic schedule, sit down, engross myself in the story, laugh along, play along, and enjoy what the developers put on a plate for me. But if the cost of that game went from £40, which it will launch at in the UK, to £50, I'd be totally alright with that. If every copy of South Park: The Fractured But Whole gave an extra $10 to the developers, the cost of developing that game would probably be a little bit more healthy. Potentially not as healthy as the money they will make off microtransactions or loot boxes, Overwatch being a perfect example, but maybe healthy enough that the need for the season pass they announced this week or further loot boxes will be somewhat unnecessary. Now, for more expensive games, that becomes slightly harder to do. Assassin's Creed Origins, for example, will launch probably around the £60 mark, which is a fairly big step up, and I would make the argument that if you're going to increase the cost of that game, you do it to somewhere between £70 and £75. That sounds very expensive, but it must be said that gaming is cheaper, when you account for inflation, than it's ever been. The entry cost for gaming is much, much cheaper as well, and games themselves can now be priced anywhere from Assassin's Creed being $60 to something like Tacoma being $15, or the Telltale series being $25. The question is, what is a consumer willing to pay for games? And I think, frankly, it must be said that gaming has always been an expensive hobby. There aren't many hobbies where the entry point to them is a £250 to £500 box. That's a fairly expensive entry price, and that's before any accessories, any games, any memberships, so on and so forth. Gaming is not a hobby with a small entry price, especially at higher echelons like upper PC gaming or VR or so on and so forth. I don't think raising the price of games would be too bad a thing. In fact, I think it could be quite healthy for the industry, as I'd like to see a bit of this piecemealing, not all of it, but a bit of it go away. But it must be said that there are other ways that we can make the gaming market a little bit more healthily, like addressing things like piracy, or perhaps scaling down some of the things we do, like E3 or major trailers. Perhaps there's a need to look at the gaming industry in a wider context here. But personally, I'd be much happier if the entry price for a single game went up a little bit to offset the price that you'll pay later on in that game's life. But, being blunt, the chances of this happening are very, very low. Games have been sold for around £40 to £60 for quite a while now, and consumers have got quite used to their prices. It would take a massive, bold step for a game, and frankly, probably a massive, well-selling game already, to make the step to increasing the price of it. And so for every game to follow in its wake, it would take a fair while, and it will need that first game to do it in the first place. I don't think this is likely to happen in the next few years, if at all. So something is going to either have to replace loot boxes or combat the problem that loot boxes could have. And God knows what the next step will be. The market has replaced piecemealing DLC, whether it be in season passes, microtransactions, or now in loot boxes, with something else every time one of them became unpopular. So it's pretty likely that we'll see something replace loot boxes if they do fall out of favour. It's just a question of what. Although I will say, I do look forward to the inevitable debates when that thing comes around. That, ladies and gentlemen, was the latest episode of Games Up Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found some interesting, informative perspectives in this week's fairly heavy episode. Next week, I do promise you the big wrap-up, reviews, previews, brief reviews, whatever you want to call it, of all the biggest games of 2017, including Assassin's Creed Origins, South Park: The Fractured But Whole, Pubbage, sort of running on a console. We'll explain that when we get there. Super Mario Odyssey, and much, much more, including some stuff looking forward to the year ahead. If you did like the show, feel free to like it on YouTube, as that would be really, really helpful to us. It gets us out in front of a few more people and lets us know that you're liking what you see, which is lovely. And you can always subscribe to the show, whether you are on YouTube or iTunes. We publish at 6:30 p.m. on a Monday on YouTube, and much, much earlier that day, so you can catch it on your way to work. We're on social media on Facebook and Twitter. We're at GamesUpcast on both, and we will see you next week for the big 2017 review preview thing. Until then, the game's up.